All right, let's just get right into it. If you've ever daydreamed about starting your own company, there's a good chance you've been fed a pretty steady diet of media that heavily romanticizes the whole journey. But today's explainer, it's all about the ground truth. We are completely stripping away the startup glamour to reveal the actual survival guide for first-time founders. We're going to dig into the raw realities of building a business from absolutely nothing, pulling directly from the playbooks of Y Combinator president Sam Altman and Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskovitz. We're going to walk through the essential checklist for early-stage survival, how you actually manage the insane psychological stress involved, and what it genuinely takes to build something people obsess over.
But first, we really have to shatter this illusion created by Hollywood. You watch movies like The Social Network, and they paint this picture where entrepreneurship is just constantly partying, spraying champagne, and effortlessly bouncing from one genius epiphany to the next. Well, Dustin Moskovitz gives us a massive reality check here. The actual day-to-day life of a founder? It is not a flashy movie montage. It's you, head down at a desk, grinding through customer support emails, doing exhausting sales calls, and just staring at a monitor trying to untangle incredibly difficult engineering problems. The reality is incredibly unglamorous, downright hard work.
So, if the reality is just pure hard work, what exactly should you be working on? Sam Altman breaks this down into 4 incredibly practical pillars for startup success. Think of this as your core checklist. You need a great idea, a great product, a great team, and great execution. Now, I know that sounds almost too simple, right? Kind of basic? But here's the thing. These are the specific variables that you, as an early-stage founder, actually have control over. You absolutely have to excel at these 4 to even have a shot at surviving.
Now, what's fascinating is how these pillars interact out there in the wild. Success isn't just adding these things up. It's literally a multiplication equation. Your ultimate outcome looks something like idea times product times execution times team, and then times luck. And luck is this massive, entirely random multiplier. We're talking a random number between 0 and 10,000. You have absolutely zero control over that multiplier. But if you relentlessly nail the 4 pillars you can control, you give yourself a real fighting chance, regardless of what that crazy luck multiplier throws your way.
Section 1. Pillar 1. The counterintuitive idea.
You hear it all the time right now. It's super trendy to say, oh, ideas don't matter. Just throw spaghetti at the wall and pivot constantly. Honestly, scratch that. Flawless execution on a terrible idea will get you absolutely nowhere. You need a great idea. But here's the twist. The absolute best startup ideas almost always look like terrible ideas at the very beginning. Just think about it. The 13th search engine at a time when everyone swore web portals were the future? Yeah, that became Google. A social network restricted to college kids with zero money when MySpace had basically already won. That became Facebook. A website asking you to literally sleep on a stranger's couch. That's Airbnb. These sounded like completely awful ideas to most people, and that is exactly what you want. If an idea sounds like a home run right out of the gate, too many well-funded people are already working on it. An idea that sounds bad but is actually brilliant wonderfully protects you from early competition. You are looking for an idea that is unpopular, but right.
And part of finding that weird, counterintuitive idea is picking the right market. You should always target a small market where you can quickly establish a monopoly. You really don't want to be fighting it out in a massive, stagnant space. It's so much better to find a small niche that is rapidly expanding. Customers in those fast-growing spaces, they're usually desperate for a solution, which means they'll actually put up with the buggy, imperfect first version of your product. You get to just ride the tailwind of that rapid growth as your little monopoly expands into an empire. Which brings us to the killer question every single founder has to answer. It's Sequoia Capital's famous test. Why now? Why is today the absolutely perfect moment for this exact idea? Why couldn't someone have done this 2 years ago, and why will 2 years from now be way too late? If you don't have a rock-solid answer for why your idea is riding a current technological or cultural tailwind, you should be highly, highly suspicious of it.
Section 2. Pillar 2. Building what users love.
Once you have that kernel of a brilliant idea, you move into the product phase. And honestly, the advice for early founders here is incredibly strict. You should basically only be doing 4 things: building the product, talking to users, eating, and sleeping. That's the whole shebang. Ignore the PR hype, skip the networking conferences. Until you've built a truly great product, almost nothing else matters. But we need to define what a great product actually means early on. Because you have extremely limited resources, you face a tough choice. Do you build something that a huge number of people kind of like, or something that a tiny number of people absolutely love? The golden rule of startups is that you must choose the love. It is infinitely easier to expand outward from a small, obsessed group of people than it is to try and scale weak enthusiasm. If they only like it, you are never going to get that explosive, organic word-of-mouth growth.
So, how do you actually achieve that deep love? You have to build an insanely tight feedback loop, and this is a critical, highly unscalable survival tactic. You do not buy Google Ads to find these early adopters. You recruit them manually. You listen to their feedback like your life depends on it, you translate that feedback directly into code to improve the product by 10% every single week, and you repeat that endlessly. Software is amazing because it lets you run this cycle in a matter of hours. And here's the kicker. As a founder, you cannot hide behind a hired sales or customer support team. You have to do this yourself, face to face, so you literally feel the physical pain when your product lets your users down.
A perfect example of this do things that don't scale mindset comes from Ben Silbermann, the founder of Pinterest. Back when everyone in tech thought Pinterest was a total joke, he didn't run marketing campaigns. He manually recruited his early users, face to face. He literally walked around coffee shops in Palo Alto, went up to complete strangers and asked them to please try out his product. He'd even run into the local Apple store and quickly change all the display max to the Pinterest homepage before security kicked him out, just so people walking in would say, "Hey, what's this?" You do whatever it takes to get those first users manually and make them love you.
Section 3. The hidden cost, founder stress.
Okay, let's take a breath and be real for a second. Because while you are grinding away manually recruiting users and coding until sunrise, there is a massive hidden cost. We really need to look at the psychological framing of a startup, going back to Dustin Moskovitz's sobering reality check. The stress levels of being a first-time founder are just off the charts, and nobody talks about it honestly. We have to normalize this immense anxiety. The heavy weight of leadership means you are always on call. 3 a.m., a holiday weekend, if the server crashes, that's on you. You carry this extreme fear of failure, not just for your own ego, but because you are literally responsible for your employees' rent. You're responsible for the massive opportunity cost of the prime years of their lives. And your day-to-day as CEO? It often just devolves into managing constant team conflict, figuring out which competing priority you can disappoint the least. Managing your own psychology literally becomes your #1 job.
And this brings us to one of the absolute sneakiest stressors out there, the commitment trap. Think about it. If you're a regular employee and you hate your job, you just put in your 2 weeks and quit. A founder cannot do that without leaving a massive black eye on their career and screwing over their team. If you are lucky, your bad idea fails in 3 months. But usually, you are locked in for years. You start in year 1, maybe by year 3 you realize, wow, this is totally failing. But then you have to spend 2 more grueling years trying to orchestrate a soft landing or an acqui-hire just to safely offboard your employees. You are trapped in that high-stress environment for half a decade minimum, even when things are tanking.
So, with all that crushing stress, you have to ask, why do it? A lot of people just assume you have to be the founder to have a major impact on the world or to make life-changing money. But let's completely challenge that myth for a second. Let's compare the realities of being a founder versus being an early employee at a breakout company. If you are a talented engineer and you join a late-stage rocket ship, say a Dropbox or a Facebook in their hypergrowth years, you could easily make $10 to $20 million with a fraction of the risk. To make that exact same amount as a founder, you have to be extremely confident that you can build a $100 million company from absolute scratch, surviving multiple rounds of equity dilution along the way.
And beyond the money, your actual impact on the world can often be so much bigger if you leverage a massive, already existing user base as an entrepreneur. Take Brett Taylor. He didn't start a startup to invent Google Maps. He built it as employee number 1,500 at Google, instantly putting it in the hands of hundreds of millions of people. Or look at Justin Rosenstein. He literally created the like button during a company hackathon as an early employee at Facebook. He didn't need to incorporate a business to permanently change how the entire world interacts online. In fact, if he had built the like button as a standalone startup, it probably would have failed without Facebook's massive distribution network.
Section 4. The only right reason.
So let's bring it all together. If the stress is debilitating, the hours are soul-crushing, the financial math is super risky, and you could probably have a massive impact working somewhere else, what is the one, singular, authentic reason to actually step into the arena and survive this journey? It basically comes down to this. You can't not do it. Dustin Moskovitz pointed out that when he and Justin Rosenstein founded Asana, they were actually reluctant entrepreneurs. They already had great jobs at Facebook working on huge problems, but they kept finding themselves staying up late working nights on this new idea because they were so intensely passionate about the problem, and they realized literally nobody else was going to build it the right way. The idea was beating its way out of their chests, forcing itself into reality. So you have to ask yourself, are you just in love with the glamour of being the boss? Or do you possess an undeniable, relentless obsession for a problem that the world absolutely needs you to solve? Because at the end of the day, that obsession is the only way you survive the founder's journey. Think deeply on that, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.